In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. By the grace of God, it is a blessing to be with you today, that God arranged for us to have a topic of extreme importance, the topic of apologetics, or the topic of all the questions regarding the faith and defending the faith. And we're going to introduce today a type of an architecture, how to approach this subject. And we'll give an example of one of the ways to address it. It is full of questions in different fields, in different levels of people, and we will explain this as we go on. So let's get to our presentation today and start looking at it as we take an example of these topics, and it will become clearer rather than just speaking without having a kind of visuals to go along with. I labeled the topic to be called Depth by Removing Doubt, because apologetics, especially when we discuss it in orthodoxy, covers everything, in the sense that it covers that when you get deeper into the faith, it will happen only by not having any doubt about anything. So this is why I called it Depth by Removing Doubt. And the topic we'll take as an example today to discuss is Christianity man-made? Is this movement or this faith that's called Christianity, is it made up or is it real? But we will see where does it fall into our apologetics. So let's call this Depth by Removing Doubt, because we will answer the questions of faith by getting deeper into answering the questions. And that's why apologetics is as follows. One cannot get deeper in the faith unless they have no doubts about the faith. Apologetics is not a mental approach to religion. Otherwise, one will become an intellect. One of the things that made me, as a priest, cautious to get into this field is to not become just an intellectual mind. I hope it does not affect my spirituality. I hope it does not affect my prayers, and I just become a reader about scientific or historical facts. But I realized, no, orthodoxy is very, very strong and defensible. So we have to be able to give an answer at all levels of questions. And we will describe these levels now in order to show that we will discuss it today without any leaning to Christianity as a religion. It will be very logical discussion. And I will present to you the umbrella or the framework in which we approach apologetics. But to tell you that we don't become just pure non-spiritual people when we discuss the subject. However, the audience, we have to address it to them not as if they are people of faith. And this is what I will do today. I'll present as a scientist or a historical without using any religious effect or any religious influence. But I wanted to let you know that it is very, very matching every Christian. Because of this verse, we have to get into apologetics. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. 1 Peter 3:15. So this verse tells us that you have, if we can get back to the verse to see it together, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. So we have to honor Christ as our God. However, people outside the faith, you have to be able to answer them in order to comfort them. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Number 3, but do this with gentleness and respect. Don't fight. Don't fight with youth who come and challenge the church. Don't think they are people who are not good people, or questions are increases the faith, not decrease it. Because when somebody is challenging, if he's not in the faith, he's increasing yours, because you have to find the answer. If he's somebody in the church, then he's anxious and he wants to find the answer, and this will make him more love the church. And this is something we have tried in our church very over the years, and the youth now are taking over to answer the questions with their colleagues in the universities and so on. So let's get back to this main idea. We cannot get deeper in the faith unless we have our doubts answered. So parents, when your children ask questions, this is very encouraged, and don't be alarmed by this. The other thing is that it is mandatory for us from the Bible. Always be prepared to give an answer. An answer here in Greek is apologia, which comes from the word apologetics, an explanation, a defense to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. So going back to our slides, we will see here that I divided the apologetics into 4 levels. Level number 1 is the level at which we discuss with people or with questions that we cannot use God or the church or the work of the Spirit or the incarnation as faith words. We have to really answer scientifically. One of the aspects of is there a God is a scientific aspect. There is philosophical questions around it, and there is history and logic. So in level 1, which is most of the people outside the church and some of our youth inside the church, they want answers. They want answers related to evolution. They want answers related to cosmology. Does Jesus exist or not? How can you convince me that this Christianity thing is real, which is going to be our topic today? And I present it in a way as if I'm giving a lecture in a university, not as a priest, in the sense that I am not trying to brainwash you. I'm not trying to tell you pray more or read the Bible more as a way of the solution. No, your questions will be answered in a very, very logical way. And today we'll give a very nice example of how to describe this movement called Christianity, that it is something we have to look into from another aspect rather than just saying it happened and we have to believe in it. So, and that, believe me, is very important for our youth, because some of them fall into the question, okay, I received the faith when I was young. I couldn't ask questions. Now I'm old and I have questions. So maybe I just believed in something blindly that given to me by my parents. And that causes some of our people to fall away from the faith. There's also some scientific challenges. All of these are answerable, but of course not today. But today we're going to answer, how can you logically give an audience a convincing argument that they have to look into this movement of Christianity as it should have died. It should not have continued. The detail will come into the talk, and I'll tell you the approach which you will see in the talk. So level 1 is the level of respecting people's ideas and questions, and you cannot answer them by faith. You have to answer them either from history, from facts from history, from science, for using the logic of deduction, or from philosophical arguments. Today we're going to use the history and the logic of deduction, or reaching a certain conclusion based on what is presented as facts. So you come up from this level. I'm going to present the whole umbrella of how I'm approaching apologetics and how it's being taught in Acts seminary that His Eminence Amba Sarabian and His Grace Amba Krollos have instituted, in order to let our servants be trained on how to approach it correctly. So upward from level 1, is there a God? Yes, after all of these arguments, which take quite a bit of discussion from every angle, there should be either a designer to the world, that it didn't start on its own, somebody designed it, initiated it. This relates to cosmology and to also evolution, which is not the topics of today. Is the topic of today, is Christianity man-made or not? So we're going to use logic outside the Bible. We conclude from all of this, yes, there is a designer, or the person, Jesus, has started a movement that is hard to think it's normal. And we're going to present today with the argument that it should have died immediately. And the fact that it continued raises a question to the audience, and they have to answer, how could it continue? Because we'll see today, we'll present a clear argument that should have not continued, if it is something from the earth and not by God. Second level okay, if God exists, in which faith, in which belief does he exist? And in this level, we do comparison with several religions on an approach called worldview approach. Any religion should be able to explain how the world came about, how the creation happened, why was man created, what is death, what is after death. These are called worldviews. That the way to approach it without offending anybody is to compare how this Christianity compared to others, because this level 2, now we know that there is a God, and there is God captured in Christianity, in Islam, in Mormonism, in Jehovah's Witness. So which one gives the best worldview that answers these questions correctly? So we conclude from this, it's the Christian faith will be the one after going through all of them. Okay, in the Christian faith, which Christianity? Is it the apostolic Christianity or the non-apostolic? Is the communion real or is it a symbol? Is the incarnation done through the apostolic church? Or there is another form of a church that can offer Christ without the sacraments? So this is level 3. And in this level, we will present enough presentation to say that communion is the solution to the fall of Adam and Eve, and that was God's plan from the very beginning. So it is the apostolic faith. Again, I'm saying these are statements now, but there is several lectures that cover all of them very convincingly. And by God's grace, hopefully writing about them as well. But I'm starting from the level 3 downwards about writing because it's very relevant to our church in terms of the communion. Now, level 4 is basically what the church does, servants, prep, and all of these things, getting deeper in the apostolic faith, all of the sermons, because the audience is already apostolic Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, so we usually talk in all of our sermons in level 4. But I realized throughout questions, throughout the years, that we have to categorize the topics into these levels. So we'll get now into the hardest level, which is level 1. That's not the simplest, because we're going to use arguments that are logical without using the Bible, because the audience is not Christian, and it makes us more strong to be able to present Christianity without having to use the Bible. The logical approach divides into 3 parts, which we'll talk about them in this this and the next coming episode. Part number 1, I will present certain facts all the history agrees upon. I call them the killers of Christianity, or Christianity killers, odds against the new movement. So as you notice here, I'm calling the Christianity as a new movement. Let's get stopped a little bit in this part. As I said, when we present this part to the audience and to even our Christian youth, they respect very, very much that I'm not coming as a priest and telling them Christianity is. I'm going to call it a movement. From now on, I will call it a movement. Even if in some slides it says Christianity, but as a movement, not as a faith, not as a religion. And the part number 1, which is Christianity killers, I will present 6 things. Each of them should have killed this movement. And the audience should say, okay, if these things, each one of them should have killed this movement, how could it continue? And that is, and I mean it seriously. And each one of them should have ended the movement and should not have continued and should not have succeeded. So the presentation is basically stacking up the odds against the success of this movement and saying, okay, if all of this should have killed it and it continues, that raises a very, very big question that probably this movement is not just an earthly movement. But I don't start by this. I will let you conclude that I will present a compelling case to show that Christianity or the movement had killers that should have killed it, and they are all very strong, but it didn't die. So we'll present it in detail to understand by your own that, yeah, the probability that this movement succeeded is 0. It should have died very, very early. That's logical. I will not use the Bible. I may refer to a verse or 2 just to support the lifestyle of this movement, coming from the writings, as if this is the writing of the people who started this movement. So you notice the approach. I am presenting here not as Abuna. I'm presenting here as somebody who's presenting very logical argument that I'm going to present the killers of this faith And you on your own, if it didn't die, you have to conclude what you will conclude. We'll see it as we go through. So getting back to this, the first arm or the first part of the logical, without using any spiritual or faith-oriented statements, is the odds against Christianity, against the odd of this movement called Christianity. Second part, there are other beliefs. The movement of the apostles, that Christ resurrected, was not the only movement available at that time. There is other faiths or other beliefs that started as well, and we will discuss these briefly and say, okay, if this movement continued and this other movement died on its own, why did it die on its own? And did the people of the first movement have a war with them? Did they kill them? So there is other faith-oriented movement started, and this one that we believe in now continued, and the others died on their own. So that's part number 2, which will probably be lumped by with part number 3. If we go back to the slides, the historical reference to the new movement outside Christianity and outside Christian sources. So part 3 is that, is there anything in history that refers to this Jesus person, that refers to these people who followed him, that refers to what they practiced, what they applied in their life, that is not Christian and outside the Bible? Is there any such thing? Yes, there is. So you can tell 1, 2, and 3 will present to us a very logical case that this movement is not from man. But I'm not starting by this. I'm going to let you conclude it on your own. And this is basically the approach we use with the people outside the church and the youth inside the church that have come to me and say, how do we know we're right? I received orthodoxy from my parents at home. Now I have questions about it. How do we know that we are the right ones? And I tell them, okay, forget your childhood. Let's start from now. Now you're logical. I'm going to present to you these facts about this movement. And you deduce from your own, does it make, the argument make sense or not? And honestly, several people I discussed with them, by God's grace, they said, you present a very, very clear case, and a couple stay in the faith. It was actually happened to me with 3 people. The third person said, Abuna, we have to meet again because this is actually give so many things for thought to think about. And it's really by the concept of probability. Is it probable that this movement is from God? Is it probable that it is from man? Which one makes more sense? So let's get into it. We'll get into part number 1, which is the killers. So to present Christianity as a movement, not as a faith, is extremely improbable to succeed. The probability that this movement would actually continue after the leader, because Jesus existed in history. We're going to prove this from historical writings. After their leader died, for this group to continue is almost impossible. We're going to see why. So let us study the odds against which Christianity survived. Let us study what were the obstacles to this movement, and these odds are extremely high, to the point that Christianity surviving is impossible. These obstacles to this movement are very, very powerful, to the point that it's impossible for this movement to continue. And we'll see them, 6 of them, each one of them should have let this Christianity thing die and not continue at all very, very early in history. To make it even more convincing, I have ignored in my argument all the lovely teaching of the leader, because it's an attractive thing to the movement. I will ignore it. I will ignore the teachings because they are from the Bible, so I will ignore them completely. I'm looking at them through the behavior of those who saw him after they claim that he resurrected. I will see their behavior, and from this behavior I will know that their teaching has a different way than the rest of the world, what they are preaching about, what they are talking people to do. I will ignore also all the Old Testament, all of the evidence of the prophecies of the Old Testament that are fulfilled. So that is a very, very strong evidence. But because I'm not using the Bible at all, because somebody says, don't use the Bible. I'm not only talking about the New Testament, but also the Old Testament. Don't use the Bible at all. So I will ignore in my arguments using what Jesus was teaching, because I will prove in my argument that Jesus existed from history, from the sayings of people outside the church about him, outside Christianity completely. I will ignore also the Old Testament prophecies, because this is very, very strong evidence for Christianity. So I will leave these out in order to tell you I will not use faith-based argument, I will use logic-based argument. Okay, so we're going to mention obstacles or odds against this movement. The first odd, or the first obstacle to this movement to succeed, is the message itself. What is the message of this movement? God became man. We know it's out of love for us, but God became man. So that's very difficult to begin with. And was crucified. Okay, so your God is very weak. He was a criminal, he was crucified. And rose from the dead. That is now completely bogus, completely very, very daydreaming. And ascended back to heaven. So even if I ask you to show him to me, you will say, no, no, he left, he's up in heaven. So I'm trying to show here that Christianity message itself is extremely difficult to believe in. So as a conversation between two people, person A and person B, person A would say, where is Christ? Person B, he ascended, so you just have to believe me. And one of the writers of this movement says, he calls it the foolishness of the gospel in his epistle to a group called the Corinthians. Yeah, it's foolish. It really doesn't make any sense. So the biggest obstacle to the movement is what the movement is talking about to begin with. It's hard to believe. It's hard to be convinced with this. Let's continue for this conversation between person A and B again. So why should person A back says, why should I believe it? Because person B tells him the resurrection. People saw him after he resurrected. Those who saw him behave different. So, and he says, person B continues, look, those who preach this have a completely different view about the importance of life, the importance of love, the contempt of worldly possessions, the contempt of death as they love those who torture them. So one of the clear historical accounts, which we'll do it in part 3, or the second part of this presentation, that the people who believed in this movement, how they behave and how the other people outside describe their behavior will be the proof of this part. But we know here that those who believed him, they don't care about the belongings of life much. We'll see this in one of the Lucianos, the writing of Lucianus, who was a Greek comedian or satirist who made fun of this movement. But as he's making fun of it, we will see amazingly how the people following this movement behave. And I will remind you in his writings that this is an amazing proof from outside the movement to describe how the people inside the movement are behaving. And you can notice I'm calling it a movement in order not to feel that I'm spoon-feeding you Christian faith. This is the way a lecture in an audience that is not faith-based should be. So the follower of this man, the importance of life for them is different. The importance of love for them is different than the rest. They don't care much about the worldly possessions, and they don't care at all about death. And they are praying for the people who were torturing them. This is historically documented about them. From non-Christian sources, there is lots of Christian sources, like Eusebius of Caesarea, but I will not use him, I will use non-Christian sources. So odd number 1 is that the message itself, let's go back, the message itself is difficult to believe in. Their leader, a god, became human. This sounds like Greek mythology. And this human was crucified, so this is very weak. But he resurrected and he ascended. So the resurrection part is very iffy because now if I say I want to see him, you'll say he ascended. So that's a very convenient argument for you to say that he's not here because he ascended. So odd number 1 itself is a killer of the movement. Just to begin with, people when they hear it, they will leave you in the middle of the conversation. That's very, very a killer of this movement to begin with. Odd number 2, the way the message is being spread. If you want to spread a message, there are 3 ways to spread the message. Secretly with deceit, fool people deceitfully. spread the religion in a cunning, lying way, because you have to deceive them. If they say that he resurrected and he didn't, then they have to spread this in a way of lying. Because did he resurrect or not? I'm going to prove that to you that he existed. So just believe with me for now that Jesus existed. As a man, there was a man called Jesus, from writings outside Christianity. So he existed. Now the part, did he resurrect or not? So the people who are after him say that he resurrected. There is two options for them. Option number one, he really resurrected. Option number two, that they are lying, that he didn't resurrect. So they have to spread the message. If he didn't resurrect, then they are liars. Then you have to spread the message in a very sneaky way, because they are spreading something. They are spreading something. They know it's not true. So there has to be a trick to spread it. So there has to be deceit. There has to be lying, deceit, to deceive the people. We saw him resurrect, and he didn't. The other way to spread the message with power and compulsion, to force the people to believe it. So he didn't resurrect, so you lie, or you have another tool, or both of them together, that who don't believe you, you kill them. You force them, you put taxes on them, you just somehow make them be afraid and they have to follow you. The third way is openly, with you being convinced with it and tolerating what happens to you. So let's get back to this argument. So if the apostles or the followers of this man were lying, because if he didn't resurrect, they are liars. Because all of what they say, that he rose again on the third. This is the whole core of the message. This is a fact known historically. This not of course this is the message of the Bible, but this is historically known, that they say that their leader is God because he resurrected on the third day. Everybody knows that this is the message they are spreading. So he didn't resurrect, so they have to lie and find a way to spread it. So they have to lie to people. There must be a type of people that are very, very sneaky and lying and find a way to spread it. Or they have a way of torturing people if they don't believe. So this is how you have to believe in them, otherwise there is consequences. Of course, knowing them, who they are, they don't have any such a power very early in the Christianity. Of course, I'm not talking about later in the Middle Ages or the Crusades. I'm talking about immediately after Christ's resurrection and Christ's ascension and the Pentecost. These are events we know from our faith, but at least let's say a couple of months after claiming that he resurrected. Third part, I will say it, and I will tolerate whatever happens to me. So we stop here very, very importantly at a point. If I preach that he resurrected and I know it's a lie, would I die for this lie? I know I'm lying. And somebody says, if you don't leave this faith, I'll kill you. And not only you, but there is other 12 and there is other 70 saying the same thing. And we know, except for St. John, that they all were executed based on this message. So if I am preaching a lie, would I die for a lie? Islam, for example, they preach something, they believe it's true. So they die for something they believe it's true. But if Christ didn't resurrect and the apostles believe it's a lie, they know it's a lie, would they die for it? That would be completely non-logical, that you die for something, you know it is a lie. So why would somebody start a religion? Well, there's a reason for starting a religion. There's money and there's power, because you are controlling people if you start a religion. Now, let's see from the behavior of the disciple, did they make money? Did they have power really to control the people? Did they really hold on to life so strong? Did they put people under subjection? In fact, we know from a historical account, from the historians, not from the Bible even, we know for sure from the Bible, but again, as I said, to bring a logical argument, we're not going to use the faith-oriented. We're going to use the logic. So think about it. If I'm inventing a lie that somebody died and I saw him resurrected, comes all the way to the point that I would die for it, impossible. If I'm psychologically unstable, maybe, but it's not about 12 and 70 people all unstable to die for something they know for sure as they are dying that he is God because he resurrected and they saw him resurrected. So that's the third option they used. They didn't use deceit, They didn't use power or compulsion, enforcing. They used, we'll preach it, and whatever happens to us happens, because now we saw him. So logically, the important part, they use the third option because they know that it is true. Because if it was false, Ray would not die for something. They know it's a lie. Nobody really dies for something he know that he invented. He would do whatever to say, no, get out of it. If it's just prison and maybe he'll get his money later on, fine. But it's death. When it comes to death, you cannot die for something you know that you invented and it's a lie thing. That's a very, very important thing, especially when we compare to martyrs in other faiths. Once these faiths got traction and they grew, they became a faith on its own and without discussing its roots. So people know that these facts are true and they die for it knowing it's true. Now we're talking about the inventors of the faith to begin with, the inventors of the moon to begin with, very, very early in Christianity. All of them died disgusted with money, disgusted with power, from their attitude, from the writings about them. They go to death singing hymns and joyfully. That is a very, very important, compelling argument that the faith itself is hard to believe in, but you're spreading the message about it in a very peaceful way. So you don't have a chance to succeed. So getting back to the presentation, obstacles to the message spreading openly. There is no political correctness where you can freely speak of Christ. Number two, the religious opponents are the Jews. The intellectual opponents are the Greeks. And the political opponents are the Roman Empire. It became fierce religious opponent also. So as you're starting to preach this fact that you believe in, you are in an environment that's very, very hostile, very against you. Three strong powers against you. The religious opponents are the Jews. You're inventing something that they feel it's a false, and this Jesus is a scammer, and we need to kill this thing in the bud and get rid of it. So these are opponents that will persecute this movement, and they did. The second ones are the intellectual. What you're talking about a God becoming human and dying and resurrecting, doesn't make any sense, and they have their own intellectual stories to challenge this. And the third ones are the political opponents. The people in power are the Romans. The Roman at the beginning, very early, did not care much, but then Nero started to turn against them. This is the first Roman emperor that he started to fiercely kill the Christians and use them in a very torturous way in the empire. And the punishment is either severe torture, imprisonment, or death, or of course the three of them together. You cannot sue any one of any of those. So we don't have any voice. As we'll see from the historical accounts, that these people were put into persecution and being killed and beheaded right away. So you have obstacles to spread the message. It means you're putting your life in danger. And sure enough, all of the beginners of the movement, they were all executed, except St. John. We know that he was exiled, which is after torturing him, he was exiled to Patmos. Examples of invented religions at that time. Is there people who started religions at that time? Yes. There is account for them. There is a couple that are mentioned by Josephus the historian, and they happen to be mentioned in the book of Acts, chapter 5. But I'm going to use Josephus because we're going to use all history here. Historians, not the Bible. So Theudas and Judas from Josephus, his major composition called Antiquities of the Jews, or for short Antiquities. You see it in the bibliography ANT, but the full name is Antiquities of the Jews, book 20, chapter 5. And it correlates with Acts 5, but I will read, of course, from history. So I'm reading Josephus now, the Jewish historian. For before these days rose up Theudas, boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain, and all as many as obeyed him were scattered and brought to nothing. So there is individuals who started to try to start something, and they are nothing. It ended very quickly. After this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing, and drew away much people after him, he also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. So yes, there is people who tried to start a movement, and the movement died, and the people who started it died. So I'm telling you in the context of this movement called Christianity that he's died and resurrected. He died publicly on the cross and resurrected privately. It should have died if it's similar to those. So this is a proof that there is other leaders who started a movement in the same environment, and the movement by itself ended to nothing, which is the same argument that Gamaliel used in Acts 5. I'm just saying this to correlate, but not use the Bible to prove, but just tell you, one of the Jews used this logic with the Sanhedrin, Gamaliel, who is actually the teacher of St. Paul. And now I say to you, refrain from these men and let them alone, for if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to naught, it will come to nothing. But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest haply means maybe, you be found even to fight against God. And to him they agreed. And when they had called the apostles, which is where it's actually St. Peter and St. John, and beaten them, so they agreed with him, but they still beat these two people of the movement. They commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus and let them go. And they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing. So this is a biblical account, you may ignore it, but I'm just telling you the mindset as being recorded about them is that the hostile environment, the Jews, you can tell they are beating them, not to use this name anymore. And we'll talk about the Romans and the Greek in the historical context soon. After they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name, for their leader's name, Jesus Christ. And daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ. You can ignore it. It's an account in the Bible, but it's mentioned here in parallel with a historical account, the account of Josephus, which is from history, which is from outside the Bible, which is by a Jewish historian, not a Christian historian. Odd number 3. So if we get back here to the talk, the presentation where we are now, we're presenting all of the obstacles that should have killed this movement, and we're calling it a movement because we're giving this presentation logically, not as a sermon in the church. So we're not using God, we're not using the Bible, we're not using the church, we're not using the Holy Spirit. We're presenting here what I call the logical or the probabilistic approach that presents certain facts, and we say, okay, is there any way for this movement to continue based on these evidence and these obstacles? And you will find for yourself that it's impossible for it to grow. I just presented 2 so far. The first one, the message itself is hard to believe, let alone for it to grow. Second, the way of preaching the message has no chance of growing in the middle of the enemies you have. The Jews who are saying these are heretics and they want to kill them after they kill their leader, the Greeks who are very mature intellectual power, and the Romans who ruled the empire and later on will turn against them and kill them. So now we move to the third obstacle. The third obstacle is that it started with, which is odd number 3, if we get back to the presentation, God left behind few people. It is not in the hundreds. 82 for some believers. 82, I mean the 12 plus the 70, 12 disciples and the 70 apostles. And remember, they speak openly, they don't use any power, and they don't use any lying. They just say, he is no longer dead, we saw him. So why was it hard that these 82 leaders would be contained by the Jews or the Romans and killed? And end of story. How is it difficult to shut up 82 people? And murder is okay, as we'll see from the very beginning by Nero. So how come after their death it continued? And because they all were executed in the 1st century. How come they survived without any weapons except their speech and loving actions? So there's no call for war after they got beaten as it said, Josephus present to us that anybody who started a movement, they were subject to death, and all of the followers were subject to death. So how did this did not stop the propagation, the growth of this movement? The leaders themselves who claimed they saw him are dead. How come when some of them were murdered, the others didn't run away and get weaker, or at least decide to use swords and fight back? None evidence in the early movement that's called Christianity has resorted to any war or any fight. This only came in the Middle Ages in Europe. But for the longest time in Christianity, till today, it was never holding a sword or fighting back with weapons, at least for sure in the very early centuries. And now we're talking about the very first few years or few months after the ascension of Christ. It is all this. They preach only, and whatever happens, happens. In fact, one of their leaders, he writes and says, "But as he which called us you has called you is holy, so you be holy in every conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy." St. Paul, one of the other converts who converted from Judaism to this movement, he says, I was a very devout Jew, circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law a Pharisee, concerning zeal persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law blameless. But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but rubbish, that I may win Christ. I'm not saying this as something to believe in God. I am quoting a document that he is saying what I was and what I joined. I lost. In the eyes of my position, I lost. But I consider it garbage just to be part of this movement. I'm writing here a couple of the early movement believers about this, about what they feel they have gained. This man, Paul, I apologize for the word saint at the beginning, just to tell you I'm presenting one of the writers. Because he's part of this movement, this is an example of what he suffered. Of the Jews who fight this movement fiercely, and I was one of them, I used to agree with this type of act. 5 times I received 40 stripes, save one, which is 39. 3 times was I beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in the sea. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, lack of food, in cold and nakedness, besides those things that are without, that are outside, those things which come upon me daily, the care of all the churches. This is his position as a pope or as a bishop. We're going to ignore this because we're now presenting the fact that somebody is telling us that his coming part of this movement led him not to a comfortable life. In fact, he lost a lot of credibility, a lot of position by leaving his background as a Jewish person and joining into this type of faith. Why did he join it? The Bible tells us he saw Jesus, but I'm not using the Bible account. I'm just saying he switched. It's known for a fact that he switched, and his switching moved him from a very reputable Pharisee, he was a Pharisee, to somebody who's with all of these sufferings. And he says, I'm happy. All of this is rubbish. Losing all of this, my position as a follower of the law of my contemporaries is rubbish, losing it for joining this movement. So I will not say he saw Christ, because this is a biblical account, and here we're presenting a logical account that will let you on your own conclude that he must have resurrected, because there is no way this, with all of these challenges, it would continue, and there's no way somebody joins it and he's his life goes that much down, even to death, and he's happy. How does that make any sense? Why would the one lose something for something? First of all, if he invented it, it would be a lie, and he's suffering the loss of everything to believe in a lie he invented. How would that be logical? Why would St. Paul, why would Peter preach a lie, which is the resurrection, and they lose money, they lose families, they get into all of these tribulations, and at the end it's death, if it's something they invented? That is completely lunacy. This is craziness. And if it's crazy in one, it cannot be crazy in 82 at the same time. And if it's crazy in 82, which is completely improbable, to have 82 people crazy about inventing something and dying for it, all of them, and then letting the other follow. You die for something you know it's true, or you invent a religion if you get benefit out of it. Benefit of money, benefit of power, benefit of fame, benefit of land. And the account of all of the historians outside Christianity about them, they don't want to have anything in the world. And I'm going to, in part 2, to show you texts that talks about them, ridiculing them, because they are very, very much against anything in the world. This will be part 2 now here. Let's get back to the logical. Odd number 4, back to the presentation, is that these leaders, consider them the popes. I mean, we're talking about these 82 disciples and apostles, at least the 12. These are the popes. When you have the pope executed, the people will feel, how are we going to survive? I mean, imagine these beginners who saw him, they get killed publicly, and they're supposed to be respectable, but there's no respect. They got tortured and killed. And in fact, we know their accounts from history. Peter and Paul by Nero, Mark in Egypt in the year 68. And this is all public, and you're getting the heads and torturing them and killing them. It should have ended. What do the people see in this public torture that ends with death, that makes them want to follow what these people believe in? What are they interested in to follow this persecution, to join it even? Another historian account that James, the early apostle in Jerusalem, was killed. So this is very, very early. Ananus, Hananiah, assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Christ, cousin of Jesus, the brother of Jesus who was called Christ. So this is a historical account that he was called Christ, whose name was James. So this opens our mind. There is, when the history talks and brings these names in, and these names match what we have in the Bible, it gives the historical context and strength to the documents that are in the Bible. And some others, or some of his companions, and when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. Josephus, book number 20, chapter 9. This is history. I'm not reading from the Bible. So somebody called James is called the brother of Jesus by the Jewish historian, and Jesus was called Christ by the Jewish historian. Says that this man Jesus, people called him Jesus Christ, and he had a cousin called James, and this cousin, an accusation was brought against him in Jerusalem, because Ananus is in Jerusalem as a high priest. And always the accusation against these people, they are breaking the law of Moses. We know this even from the documents in the Bible, how they bring it against Paul in Jerusalem. And he delivered him to be stoned. So telling you that all of the early followers, or all of the disciples, or all of the people that Jesus called to his movement have been killed. So how, we have to ask ourselves, how come this movement grows? It is all counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. They have no riches. They are tortured. They preach love and peace and do not fight back. God whom they are preaching does not come and save them from death, although they are dying for him. In fact, they die. What is making people follow this faith? They shouldn't. So odd number 5 now, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire. That is a very good, strong besides the other four, a strong argument that this movement really is very strange. Now, the Roman Empire is not short. It's 300 years doing every effort to get rid of this new sect. So let's talk a little bit here before we continue. You have now this group that don't fight back. They don't have swords. They don't bribe. In fact, knowing from their movement, they are living very purely. They don't have any lying. The account of them. I'm saying these things, and it says, how do we prove this? I'm going to tell you this when we read about the historical people writing about them. Example, what we see Josephus here. He's talking to us about James, about people who started movements and died. So now we know for a fact there was the Roman Empire, and the emperor at the time of the disciples was Nero, and he was ruthless against the Christians, as his own historians write about him. Tacitus, for example, a major Roman historian. So 300 years, let's think about it. 300 years, the whole empire, in different parts, mainly 10 emperors, but they're not consecutives. There is like breathing room in the middle. From Nero till Diocletian, the Claudianus, killing, confiscating, killing, torturing before the killing, trying to get rid of these people. And there's no war that like Christians attack the empire. Why doesn't it die? There's a very logical anomaly here. So let's get back to the presentation. 300 years doing every effort to get rid of this new sect. For the Roman Empire, worshipping idols is not optional. It is a part of serving the country. It is part of serving in the army to defend the empire. Christians would not worship the idols. This is the part where they say no. Every other thing in the empire, they say yes. I'm going to prove it to you now that they were model citizens. They were perfect citizens. According to their teachings, they did not know anything that would let the empire attack them. It was just on this one thing, which is offer incense to these gods. So the Roman Empire put an effort to annihilate Christians. For them, the gods is part of the empire. If you don't worship them, you are subject to murder. If you are a Roman citizen, you get into trial. Later on, one of the emperors says, no, there is not even a trial for them. They immediately go to torture and death. So they lost even the power of being a Roman citizen. So there are some counter-arguments by atheists that Christians were persecuted by the Roman Empire because of disrupting the social and civil system. It's legal reasons, not faith. So we're going to answer no. They were persecuted based on faith, not based on behavior. Christians were model citizens, and we're going to prove now they were model citizens. They tried to portray that the faith was not being persecuted by the empire, hence belittling the martyrdom. So let's prove that the Christian behavior within the empire was model. It would not threaten the empire. Christians preach purity and fighting on a personal level, the sexual immorality. The body is the temple of the Lord in 1 Corinthians 6. So Christians are against sexual immorality. That is not against the empire. This is against the personal behavior. Shouldn't threaten the empire if somebody wants to live without sexual immorality. Christians preach peace, but in the meantime defending the country if enlisted in the army. There is Christian people enlisted in the army, and they were fighting in the army against any enemy. Christians preach accepting the government, except for idol worship. So they respected the government and the laws of the government. Let's see this. Christians asked the slaves to obey the masters. So there is no threat. If Christians said slaves do a revolution against the masters because we're all equal in front of God, then they deserve to be killed for this or persecuted for this. Christians didn't break the houses. In fact, Christians urge husbands who believe in Christ in a non-Christian family, and urged wives who believed in non-Christian families not to leave the spouse if the spouse is willing to stay in the marriage. Christian system for taxes and customs. Let's see this. Did the Christians obey in paying the customs and the taxes to the empire? Again, if the Christians, the apostles told the followers of this movement, this empire we're living in is an atheist empire, you're not supposed to pay money to them, that would be a reason for them being persecuted. But in fact, let's read this verse, let's read these teachings in Romans 13. back to the presentation, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God, the powers that are be ordained of God. Then give to all their dues. To the one due tax, the tax. To the one due tribute, the tribute. To the one due fear, the fear. To the one due honor, the honor. This means what? Let's stop here for a minute. Although the emperor is Nero, the Paul, writing to the Romans, living right under the nose of Nero, pay the taxes, give Nero the honor, give the ruler the honor. He is of God. He is now there to protect the empire. All about obeying the emperor. And very much important for obeying the emperor, the financial stability of the empire. So the followers of this movement, no matter what our empire believes in, we have to respect it. We have to obey the laws. We have to obey the government. We have to pay all of what is due on us like every other citizen. We have to be model citizens. The second part, it's going back to the presentation, husbands and wives. Did Christianity encourage divorce if one believes in the family and the other doesn't? In fact, it's the opposite. And the woman which has a husband that does not believe, if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now they are holy. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. So you cannot deny your faith for the sake of he staying with you or she staying with you, in case you're a man, and the first case in case you're a woman. But if you believe and he doesn't, but you're willing to continue in the marriage, stay. It doesn't say leave the person or shun him out. The shunning concept is not with us at all, which is existing in other beliefs that we'll not get into it now. To shun the person if he's not part of you. We don't have the shunning in Christianity. That would be in other faiths. Sometimes the shunning reached the point of murdering the unbeliever. Shunning him means basically consider him non-existent. Even if he lives with you in the same house, just treat him as if he doesn't exist. This movement says exactly the opposite. Stay with the person, even have children with the person, and your marriage is holy. Although one of you did not join Christianity, but your marriage is holy. So that proves to us that this movement, when it entered homes, and one believes and one doesn't, it asked the believer, if the other person is willing to stay with you while you're believing in this movement, don't leave, continue. So it controlled the marriage to be continuing, encouraged it. It also encouraged very much and was mandatory to pay the customs and the taxes. The most and very important thing, slaves. So of course, let's talk about this a little bit. Christianity did not encourage slavery, but it made it an employment. We are now, as a slave, employed by a master. And this master, we have to obey him because you're getting shelter and food from him. So out of your love to God, you have to love the master, even the evil ones of them. So it told the slaves, do not make a revolution against them, but obey them. And that was extremely important because if this movement said, the Christian movement said, for the slaves to be against the masters, then we have a very, very big problem. And the empire would be persecuting them. So, three things. Financial stability was not affected by the Christianity. Social stability in terms of the marriage was not affected. And social stability in terms of employment and how the empire functioned, it was not threatened by this movement. The only thing they say no to is when you ask to offer incense to the idols. So Christianity was not a threat to the Roman Empire at all. The Roman Empire decided to persecute them because they believe in another God. So let's read about the slaves, back to the PowerPoint. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord, and not to men, knowing that whatsoever doing good thing any man does, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he bond or free. So slaves, obey your masters, and know that you're as if you're serving God directly. This is to the masters who believe. And you masters do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. So when masters are Christians, telling them, okay, now since you're a Christian, be careful the way you treat your slave. So this new movement respected the fabric of the empire. They are truly model citizens, economical fabric, the customs and the taxes, the family fabric, the marriage, the social cohesion, and the master-slave fabric, which is the employment and the social fabric. Yet the Roman Empire, based on hating this higher moral code, decided to remove the Christians, and without any laws to prevent them. So let's get back to this conclusion. You have this now in front of you. With all of these things against it, it should have died with the first Roman emperor, Nero. Should have been able to take control of it, kill them all, and it's finished. So let's get back to this talk. Given the following, Christ is not here, he ascended. Christians have no army to fight back, they are just people. They are ridiculed all the time due to their beliefs and the way of pure living. What is expected? The first Roman emperor will have no problem to kill them all, and that is it. Christianity, sayonara, bye-bye. It's over. This movement is done, as Theudas and Judas. Christianity and the Roman Empire, now we have 10 Roman emperors over 300 years trying to do that by killing Christians after torturing them publicly, and yet this mighty empire was not able to get rid of Christianity. Moreover, in fact, in 312, Christianity became an accepted faith of the empire by Emperor Constantine. It doesn't make any sense. How come 300 years of 10 Roman emperors in the middle, from Nero to Diocletian, were not able to get rid of this movement? And as we said, they have no power in terms of weapons. They have no earthly way to defend themselves. They are being tortured. They are being killed. How come they increase and not decrease? It doesn't make any sense. So I will conclude this part, and we'll leave the rest for the historical parts by presenting these 5 odds. Number 1, the message itself, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension. Also the Lord who was here is not here, that he ascended. So number 1, the message itself is very, very difficult to believe. It should have made the movement crumble upon itself, just implode, die. Number 2, the way the message was spread is just by talking, and whatever happens to you happen. Again, it's not going to be a successful way to spread something that's that difficult to believe in. Number 3, only few numbers did it. The 82 disciples started the preaching. Number 4, the 82 people who were persecuted and at the end were killed, except for St. John, but he was tortured. Before being exiled to Patmos, he ended up being exiled to die there. Number 5, 300 years, the severe persecution of the ruthless Roman Empire for more than 300 years, from Nero till the year 312, killing, torturing. With these 5 together, what is the chance? What is the chance that it would have succeeded? So let's have this conclusion at the end. Let's come back together and say, we presented here a logical case without getting into the details of the faith, except one thing. The faith, these believers claim that he is not dead, that he resurrected. And they started preaching them. And these obstacles, the 5 of them, the message is difficult to believe in. And the fighters of it are the Jews, the Greeks with their mental power, the Jews with their background and their faith, the mental power, and the Roman fierce empire. Number 2, the way of the preaching is very peaceful, and you're preaching something illogical, it shouldn't continue. Number three, the number of preachers at the beginning is very, very few. And this is the top of the movement. So number four, when they all die, it should crumble, it should die. The believers, these who are really very powerful speakers who claim they saw him died. And we say that now, if they are liars, and he didn't resurrect, and they said that he did, they should have been easily taken care of. They should have been easily lifted, because nobody dies for something he invents to be a lie. And this is a very strong argument. People die for something they know it is true. And they know that they saw him, and that's why they were able to face death happily. It is documented about them that they believe in a second world, as the other people who wrote about them, making fun of them, that document that they have a preaching among them that they will live in another world permanently. So this tells us from outside the church what the behavior of these people was. And as I said, that's why I didn't use the Bible, I didn't use historical sources, to make it completely logical. So with these 5 obstacles, what is the chance for Christianity to succeed? In fact, the chance is 0. There's another 6th obstacle, I haven't covered it here, but it's called the scoffers. The scoffers, basically, part of the preaching of the disciples that their leader is coming soon. Jesus Christ is coming soon, and they believed this. And he didn't come. So that makes it harder even to believe them. So the scoffers' manifestation, هم المستهزئين, it comes in the writings of St. Peter. But logically, it's concluded that they're saying, he's coming soon, we have another world with him, and people say, where is he? Where is he? So they added another 6 obstacles for it's harder to believe in them. So it is a very, very strong argument, and I'm presenting to you what is called the probabilistic argument. From these 6 items, we can conclude logically it should not have continued. And I will leave you now, but it did. So how? And of course the answer, as we know, because of the truthfulness of the resurrection. But I would not start with this, because I will be giving a sermon. I wanted to get to it logically. And I hope this resonates well with your logic. And this is again level 1 in apologetics, which is the hardest level, where I cannot use the Bible or the church to give an argument. This is what's most effective when one of your children says, I received the faith as a child. I just was spoon-fed. I was brainwashed by my parents. Maybe it's not the right one. And I tell them, okay, let's start from the beginning. And I present this very, very helpful for them to conclude on their own that what they are in is truthful. Also, for outside the church, we here have not used or claimed any book or revelation or anything. I'm just presenting from history a case that would let the listener just stop and says, yeah, there's something weird here. This is what I want them to put into their atheistic mind to think about it. Yeah, there is something not normal here. With these 6 odds, how would this movement continue? We'll see you in another session to talk about the historical accounts from outside the historical writings and outside the Bible that would help us more prove that this Jesus existed, his disciple existed, and what they believe in from people talking about them. See you in the next episode, and pray for me. Glory be to God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen.